Hi, everyone. Welcome to my presentation. My name is Angie Vo, and I am a PhD student at the University of Texas at Dallas. And today we'll be talking about girl bossing too close to the sun, where we explore the pitfalls of capitalism and neoliberalism in the context of OnlyFans. So let's go ahead and get started. So the erotic canon industry has been around for about 3 decades now, but as the COVID-19 pandemic happened, all of that was sort of turned upside down. And we experienced a lot of unexpected technocultural innovations that came out of that, just because a lot of online and offline operations were completely changed due to the pandemic. And so we see a really big uptick in online usage, and that in return has affected the erotic canon industry. So as we see a lot of more usage within the digital realm, a lot of people have flocked to online platforms for sex work, and so we'll be exploring a little bit of that today. So I wanted to zone in on OnlyFans as a curious case study to explore sex work through the lens of neoliberalism. As we progress through exploring OnlyFans, I wanted to use Angela Jones' book, Money, Power, and Pleasure in the Sex Work Industry as sort of like a cornerstone, or I guess a guide, in order for us to understand where OnlyFans lies in terms of the sex work industry. So one thing to keep in mind is that this book was released right before the pandemic, I believe a couple months before that. And so it'll be really interesting to unpack a lot of what Jones has found pre-pandemic, and then we'll sort of apply that to OnlyFans post-pandemic to see if her research is still like really relevant and all that. So it'll be a really interesting way to sort of explore OnlyFans. So this piece will look at how online sex workers experience intimacy and community and empowerment and pleasure. And again, because this was written before the pandemic, it'll be really interesting to analyze sexuality, gender, race, and labor during another era of precarious work and alienation. Another piece that I was really interested in sort of using as a cornerstone is Bernstein's book, Temporarily Yours, Intimacy, Authenticity, and the Commerce of Sex. And so Bernstein in this book looks at different social factors that have sort of driven the growth of commercial sex. And so we look at different economic and cultural changes. So in this case, it would be the COVID-19 pandemic, to sort of see how like the forms and meanings and like understandings of sexual labor have transformed throughout this very formative period of time. And so again, this book was also written before the pandemic too. And so again, it's a really interesting way for us to see what has been theorized before, and provides us tools to look at different situations such as the COVID-19 pandemic and sex work. So there are a lot of like discourse about being a girl boss and you know, the choice female rhetoric and all that. And so we're going to look at sort of like complicating that sort of language with like the sort of empowering I guess logic that comes with being one's own boss and having that freedom of choice and all of that within sex work. So we'll dive into the sort of girl boss rhetoric. Before we get into that, why OnlyFans? OnlyFans is a really interesting case study because it originally was not a platform used for sex work. It was used for like just exclusive content, but it morphed into a platform for sex workers to promote more of their own content. And so the catalyst for the explosion of OnlyFans engagement was marked by the COVID-19 pandemic. Honestly, the conditions were just perfect for that. There was online booming business, a lot of digital engagement because everyone like moved all their stuff online. We transitioned from in-person to online sex work, and there was also a really big desire for intimacy and companionship, which, you know, during the pandemic, we were mostly quarantined, and so a lot of individuals were trying to seek out that sort of intimacy and companionship, and OnlyFans was able to provide that because of how user-friendly it was and the opportunities that sex workers and their fans or their customers were able to sort of foster a better, closer relationship. The other thing that was very lucrative about OnlyFans was the rhetoric of you being your own boss. So it sounds really nice, like being your own boss has a really nice ring to it. And we'll see a lot of individuals talk about how enticing OnlyFans is because one could like utilize this platform in their own time and schedule their own hours and all that too. So that was one of like the buzz phrases of OnlyFans during the time. So I grabbed several screenshots of online sex workers talking about how easy, quote unquote, easy it is to make money on this platform, and is it worth it? It's, you know, they talk about whether or not it's worth it, how much they make, and all of that. And so the culture around OnlyFans in terms of creators right now looks like it's pretty lucrative. And so this is a really big piece of text, but this was a testimony from one of the sex workers saying that OnlyFans really provides a nice and private and safe and virtual space for them, and that their fans are really supportive, respectful, and kind, and that they have total control over their page, and that it's one of the safest forms of sex that someone can participate in. And so this was coming from a white creator, and we'll see later on that one's personal testimony might not reflect within other workers' testimonies. So that is really important to keep that in mind. So now that we've talked about OnlyFans, we'll sort of switch gears a little bit and talk about feminism in a capitalistic world first before we see the two sort of intermingle together. So again, the ability to be one's own boss sort of feeds into the sort of girl boss, girl power feminism, which is actually an extension of choice feminism, which is the melding of professional self, identity, and capitalist aspiration. So I grabbed a couple of screenshots here of what girl boss really means culturally. Here it says, an empowering woman that kicks ass, is control of her life and achieves her dreams, and someone who knows her worth. This is, again, in sort of a capitalistic framework. Here it says, on this image, it says determination 100%, dedication 100%, planning, execution, passion and faith, strategy, caffeine, all 100%, and 0% regret. So it really does reflect a really big capitalist aspiration. And this last year right here, I'm just girl boss building her empire. So it goes to show the amount of like capitalist aspiration that is really embedded in this logic here. So choice feminism, I dove into a little bit of research of that because I was curious why it was so big in the early, like about the 2010s. Being a girl boss was like one of the biggest buzzwords, right? So yeah, it really promotes women to just, you know, seize the day and to consider their decisions as always just and politically acceptable. And so that we'll dive into a little bit more of that as we go along, but it's really interesting to show that like these women are really empowered to just seize the day. So now we'll go into I guess, girl bossing and like what that means in more neoliberal terms. So neoliberalism draws upon personal responsibility, which was really reflected in those memes and those shirts earlier, to just seize the day and to build your own empire. And it shows that you need to like really take on all of that personal responsibility. And girl bossing or choice feminism really morphs feminism into a more personal issue rather than a collective and systemic issue. And so this rhetoric shows that women can feel comfortable making their own choices, but low-key makes them more complacent by removing that sort of need to challenge the frameworks in the first place. But you just got to do what you got to do in this world, right? You can, with the tools and means that you have, you could rise up the corporate ladder or whatever empire that you're trying to build, rather than, you know, actually challenging some of these frameworks that were put in place before. And so there's a really big illusion of choice here. So they were alluded to, well, I guess they're under the impression that like they have all of that choice, but is it really a choice? So now we'll look at the sort of underbelly of girl bossing under capitalism. And then we'll go into what that means for OnlyFans. In this whole pandemic, in the past, like there were a lot of really, really unintended explosions of innovation. But now when we look at OnlyFans, there are also some unintended consequences that come out of this seemingly positive or sex positive piece of technology, where you can be your own boss, you could work your own hours, and you could really build your own empire by doing this form of labor on your own terms. And that has been embedded socially and culturally and economically, as you've seen in the YouTube screen caps, in terms of the overall, like the memes and merch and all that. They really talk about like that freedom of choice and the empowerment that comes from, you know, laying down your own framework and, you know, just seizing the day. So that, coupled with the neoliberal idea of individualism, what ends up happening is perpetuating gender, race, and class inequalities on OnlyFans. And it also means competing in like saturated markets as well, combating competition, and also combating competition through really, really extreme means. So as you've seen in those screen caps of those girls earlier, they talk about how enticing it is and how lucrative this business is. And so what ends up happening is this really big influx of people who also want to chase that sort of neoliberal dream of being your own boss, of being empowered to do that too. But now it creates a super oversaturated market. So this is a testimony from another sex worker that talks about sort of the underbelly of OnlyFans. So she said that every time I posted something, my followers would say, "That's good, but it's not enough." I felt like I had to keep getting more extreme. I told myself I was empowered and wanted to pretend that I was, but I felt horrible. I was smiling in the pictures, but I wasn't there. So now we're seeing this trend of a lot of sex workers struggling with not being enough, just because the ones that are really, really successful are doing different things to sort of set themselves from the competition. And so now, because of this oversaturated environment, one has to figure out how to stand out from the rest. And so now workers have to sort of think about, what is the next big thing? What is something that I need to offer that other people can't offer? And that could be going into different unsavory forms of labor that they might not feel comfortable with. And like she said, I wanted to pretend that I was empowered, but I felt horrible. So a lot of these individuals are now putting themselves into very precarious and unsavory positions in order to maintain their clients. So we talk about this sort of like empowerment, and it looks like coercion. It really is a coercion, and it is a clear image of really like just markets that are really centered in capitalism and being saturated with workers. And now these individuals are being pushed beyond their boundaries and forced to rationalize this coercion and be like, that's the way the cookie crumbles, without really challenging these conditions. So like I said before, market saturation really puts a lot of workers through not very great situations. Some of them have to decrease their rates. They have to push their bounds of performance, and in return, they have a lot less control over their careers because they're limited with options. But they have this illusion that those are their only options, operating within these confines of OnlyFans. So we talked about like creators being pushed to coercion and all that, but there are also a lot of instances of discrimination and a lot of undercutting some of these Black and brown creators. Earlier, I mentioned a quote from a white creator that says OnlyFans is great, you can be your own boss and everyone is so nice and all that. But what does that look like when you are a Black individual or a brown or a person of color? A lot of them really do face racism and discrimination from the quotes and like the testimonies that I've explored within my paper. A lot of them really like struggle with their clients and like the landscape of OnlyFans because of their racial identity and all that. They also grapple with pay gaps and, like I said, Black creators being paid less and treated differently than their white counterparts. So this was a really, really striking quote that I wanted to include in this presentation. OnlyFans reminds us of an enduring historical truth. Sex work has always been central to capitalism, and Black women have borne the brunt of its most exploitative designs. And so looking back at my my research, it really shows that the language of empowerment within neoliberal feminism is a really potent tool that capitalism uses in order for it to progress forward, especially within the world of sex work. And so neoliberalism thrives hand in hand with capitalism and really works together at the expense of our sex workers. And so I don't know, perhaps our gaslighting, gatekeeping, and girl bossing isn't as productive as we thought. And thank you so much for your time. If you have any questions, please reach out to me. I really enjoyed this opportunity to do research within this space, and it really has been such a rewarding journey so far. So again, thank you so much for your time. Have a good one.